everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Commit Podcast, where we invite top engineering talents to share how they build software. Our today's guests are Lakshya Thakur and Rajat Kapoor, who are the engineers in Hashnode's team. Today, we're going to discuss how we build Hashnode's editor. So let's get started.
Hey, Sandeep. Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Why don't we start with a quick introduction to both of you?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll go ahead. So, hey, folks, I'm Lakshya Thakur, and I'm located in Gurgaon in India. It's next to the capital of India, Delhi. And as you know, the weather isn't too well right now, but I can just blabber about that and at some other note. But yeah, I've been working at Hashnode for around 2 years now. I think I completed my 2 years just last month, and thank you. It's been a great journey so far, and I started as a front-end dev, and I have been now overlooking most of the web-related stuff, if it's something related to performance, accessibility, or security. And yeah, it's been amazing so far. Over to you, Rajat.
Nice. Thank you, Lakshya. So I'm Rajat Kapoor. I'm the product engineering lead at Hashnode. I have been with Hashnode for around 1.5 years now. I believe I'm close to 2 years, but yeah, way after Lakshya. So I have been working on a lot of things, a little bit of all things, but majorly I've been working on the editor and just like the Hashnode product and the platform that you see when you come on side of Hashnode. So that includes the feed, the discussion feature that we recently launched, but primarily the editor. Yeah, it's been a fun journey. It's been an amazing 1.5 years. I'm very proud of the work that we are doing here, and the users are also reciprocating and realizing the effort that we are putting into building these things and liking it. And that's what I like about the work here. The feedback that we get from the users directly is very, very motivating.
Great. I know that you guys are making a lot of impact and have been pushing really, really hard, and really appreciate that. So, before we start, let me start with a fun fact. So last year, around this time, we launched Hashnode's new editor in public beta, right? And it has been almost a year now. So that makes for a really nice time to kind of reflect and kind of discuss the things that we have done and the kind of work that we have put together here. My first question to you guys is what was Hashnode's old editor like around this time this year? And why did Hashnode decide to build, or let's say invest in a new editor altogether?
Cool. I like that. So I think what we had earlier before this rich text editor was a much more basic editor. So it was a Markdown-based text editor in which users could just write text in raw Markdown. And then we added some bells and whistles on top of it. So firstly, it was Markdown-based because devs are very, very familiar with Markdown. They are very, very habitual of writing Markdown for generating websites, for generating documentation, or creating all sorts of content on the web or on their local machines. So that's why we had Markdown. And for the devs that did not love Markdown, we had a small guide that popped up from the right-hand side, which explained them how to use Markdown. So it was just like a Markdown crash course in a sidebar. So in that editor, we added some more rich text functionality, to support the things that were particular to Hashnode. So these are things like user mentions, and we also had some shortcuts baked in for just adding, making some text bold or italicizing stuff or all those things. And then when they have written these things, we had a preview button on the top. It was kind of two tabs. One was the right tab, and then there was the preview tab. You click on the preview tab, and then we generate the preview of the Markdown that you have written. So it was, it served us well for 3 years. No hatred towards that editor. But yeah, it was not the most easiest and the intuitive way of writing content. So, and we're getting a lot of feedback around how we could improve those things, and we are seeing a lot of libraries that people were using in order to build great editors. So that's why we thought we can solve these problems.
Okay, and so just for our listeners, the old editor was very, very basic, like Rajat said, and which means everyone had to be familiar with Markdown in order to compose content. And if you are not that technical, and if you do not know Markdown, it used to be very, very difficult for people to write content on Hashnode, and which means it was time for us to rethink how the editor should behave on Hashnode and what the future might look like. And now maybe Rajat can talk a little bit about the next steps we took, and why exactly we decided to how exactly we decided to solve those issues.
Yeah. So I think like the one of the things that users were requesting a lot was having a WYSIWYG editor, so they do not have to switch between those write and preview tabs. And we with that, like we were not just solving this problem. One issue that we were seeing a lot of users face was that they were writing Markdown, but if that had like if that was not following the standard Markdown practices, or if there were syntax errors, they were seeing errors on the preview page without getting a notification, like without getting a proper error message to debug how where in their Markdown the issue lied. So we wanted like something WYSIWYG, so that as soon as users are typing, they can see what they are creating, they can see the content that they are creating, and make it look very, very close to how it would appear on their published blog post. And in that process, we did not want to lose the Markdown-based functionality. So we wanted like a mix of both the words. But creating this WYSIWYG editor, we also want to cater to the non-Markdown versed users. So we wanted to have everything available to the users at a in a tap away, so that they can create all types of content. Apart from that, the things that we wanted to fix, or like we fixed eventually with this editor, was it was possible for us to identify what the users, or like the creators or the editors, are trying to create. So basically, in Markdown, when they were writing a certain text, or writing a certain, or like adding a link to their article, it was not possible for us to ascertain from the text that they have written that they intended to add a link. But now in this WYSIWYG editor, we had like specific flows for adding all types of content to the editor, which made it like fairly easy for us to understand what types of content are being used more, so that we can focus our efforts on those content. So yeah, I think that was one more of the things that we wanted to solve. And with this, because this was a WYSIWYG editor, what we ensured was that people could not get into incorrect Markdown states. So if they are inserting a link, there's a way to insert the link, and that link was being inserted in the correct way. And then the Markdown representation also represented it in the correct way. So that was our focus, and those are the things that we kept in mind while fixing this.
Sure. Just for our listeners, we have two modes. We have a WYSIWYG mode, and we also have a raw Markdown mode. So what Rajat means is that if you're using the WYSIWYG editor and you insert a link in an incorrect way, that would not render properly when you go to the raw Markdown mode. So which means we had to make a lot of adjustments. We had to put in a lot of work to ensure that if a link is working fine in the WYSIWYG mode, it also should work in the raw Markdown mode if you switch the mode of the editor. And since we're talking about different content types, just for our listeners, can you expand a little bit on what kind of content types do we see people using, and do you see any specific patterns, or do you see any specific content types being used more than the rest?
So basically, when we talk about content types, we mean that if a user is writing a heading, or if a user is writing a paragraph, a link, code block, with the existing editor, we were not able to track the usage patterns of what the users are editing, what they're writing on, whether it's a heading, it's a paragraph. And now we are able to do that because of the underlying tech. And I can just see from a 12 months of usage pattern that I think the most used stuff is heading, and then followed by bold tags. And headings kind of make sense because we have a powerful table of contents feature, which makes use of those headings and allow the readers of our users to basically navigate to wherever they want to go in their article. And then it's followed by code blocks and inline code, which does make sense again because we are a dev first platform, and most of the users are writing articles which are where they're explaining their code to all the readers. And then I think the third category falls into for the links and embeds, where you are redirecting users to some of your existing integrations or something that you have done. So this is the usage pattern that we have seen generally. And it's kind of good to track that because it helps us to make more informed decisions about the next set of features that we want to develop.
All right. Exactly. Fair enough. So as the next question, I would like to address the elephant in the room, right? So the big question is that Hashnode evaluated a ton of libraries and frameworks to get the job done, but ultimately decided to use TipTap. So can you share what libraries did we evaluate and why exactly we decided to use TipTap?
Sure, I can take that up. So again, so we evaluated a lot of libraries. I actually remember creating a table of libraries just to track which one is good with what and which one is not good with what. So basically, the bigger contenders were Slate. So one of the contenders that we tested out was Slate.js. That came because I wanted, like, I had a personal preference of using Slate because I have been using Slate in my previous companies as well. So I was very inclined to using that. I had seen its capabilities, and it's like a fairly powerful editor. But we did not go ahead with that. The primary reason for not going ahead with Slate was that they still hadn't released a 1.0 version. So they were in beta and they did not release a stable version. So in my time working with Slate earlier, I had realized that they were breaking APIs quite a bit during their non-stable updates. So that's why we could not go ahead with Slate, but like still a very powerful library. No, I love Slate. I still love Slate. And then we also tested a library that was launched very recently. It was called Lexicon. It was by the folks at Meta. So it was hard to ignore. It was making a lot of waves. We're seeing like good things written about Lexical at that time. But at that time, it did not have like a very good Markdown support. So we did not go ahead with it. I'm not following up. Probably they have like a much better Markdown support right now. But we did not go ahead with Lexicon. But then we finally settled on TipTap. Now, disclaimer, TipTap also did not have like a very good Markdown support. So TipTap did not have a way of working on top of Markdown documents. It accepted only HTML or like the underlying JSON document that they can support for editing. And essentially, they have a disclaimer on their website as well that they're not going to support like editing Markdown documents. But we still went ahead with them because I think their decision was like fairly clear by the time that we had evaluated all these libraries. The TipTap brought a lot of functionality out of the box, and it was highly extensible. And in terms of its foundation, it was based on top of Prose Mirror, which is like the OG editing library, and like a lot of it's like an amazing library. It's been an open source library for a very long time, and it has a lot of extensibility as well. And TipTap built on top of it. So TipTap essentially is like I won't call it like calling it a wrapper on top of Prose Mirror won't be good, but it's like based on top of Prose Mirror, but you can still access the underlying Prose Mirror functionality as well. And it was being actively developed. That is one of the things that we usually have to look at while choosing any open source software, that it should be actively developed. And TipTap was. And it had React support. That was something that was very important to us. So the content types, like we talked about, like links and code block, in order to add interactivity on top of it, we could add React nodes on top of it and attach React nodes on certain types of content types. So that was also one a killer feature of TipTap that was possible with Slate as well, but TipTap handled it in a very nice way, and its future looked bright. So it like the community was very active, and people were like talking about it. There were other projects that were using it, and that also influenced our decision. And I think that decision went right. So TipTap is now even bigger. They are a YC-backed company, and they're doing great. And we're seeing a lot more projects like Adapt TipTap. I hope that people got inspired by looking at Hashnode by the editor that we have built, that people have started adopting TipTap more. But TipTap was a great choice for us.
Great. Right. That's really nice. I also remember that we also purchased TipTap Pro. I think at the time, do we use any of those Pro extensions?
Oh, so at that time where we made the decision of purchasing TipTap Pro, we were not using any of the Pro extensions. We just wanted to give it back to them, and that's why we did that. Now we do use some of the Pro extensions, and now TipTap has also fairly evolved. They are offering a much more variety of Pro extensions, but it's just that like we have chosen the one that suit the types of content that our users want to create, and we are using some of them.
Right. And I also remember trying out another library called Markdown, which was pretty good, but I think we had a lot of trouble customizing it because it already had a lot of things inbuilt, such as code highlighting, syntax highlighting. Everything was built in, but it was hard to extend it. But if you just ignore that, I think the Markdown is also a quite nicely built library, and it would have been a great choice. All right. So since we're talking about TipTap, Lakshya, do you want to highlight what are the different type of content types that we support, and do you see any specific patterns?
Yeah, surely. So one of the things is that we are also a very early adopters of TipTap. We started using it when it was in beta, and that kind of allowed us to look into, and also it's open source, right? And as Rajat mentioned, that it's based on top of Prose Mirror, and it uses a lot of Prose Mirror libraries, and that was one of the selling points, because we wanted to also ensure that all the content types are tracked effectively. And as we already talked about all the content types like heading, bold, and embeds, widgets, code blocks, and the list goes on. And we can probably expand on these. TipTap, being built on Prose Mirror, allowed us to hook into its transactions capability. What are transactions? Well, transactions are anything in Prose Mirror world which kind of are like events, which allows us to preserve the history, basically preserve history or do anything. Everything is a transaction in Prose Mirror world, and we wanted to track the events for the content types without coupling our analytics code with it. So we found a nice middle ground where TipTap offered this on transaction hook, where from all our content types, whether we are writing a heading, whether it's using a mouse click, whether we are using the floating bar that we have, or it's a keyboard focus, we could just dispatch one or the other transaction. And within that handler, we just forward it to our analytics service. So these kinds of bits and pieces which TipTap provided us, instead of us directly hooking into Prose Mirror, but still having the flexibility, was very good. And that is how our whole, I think, analytics system also works with the editor. Yeah.
That's great. And since you talked a little bit about the history part, I think I just remembered that our old Markdown-based editor had a huge problem handling history, right? And we used to get a lot of complaints and reports from the users that if they embed something or if they upload an image, after that, if they press Command Z, the whole history just breaks. And I'm glad that it was solved by TipTap. And I think the whole history management comes inbuilt with TipTap.
Yep.
Yes.
The whole thing is again a part of I think something that Prose Mirror had, and then TipTap extended on top of it. They do have their history extensions, and I think with the old implementation we were still stuck with text area, and we could just rely on how text area handles text. It didn't have any notion of if it's a content type, if it's a block, if it's a node, or if it's a mark like bold or text. And here, because we have transactions, I think the history was straightforward, and we didn't have to actually put in a lot of efforts for the history here, because TipTap did the heavy lifting for us. And we could actually also, because everything is based on transactions, we could skip something from history if we wanted to. And we have done that at a couple of places where we know that undo doesn't make sense here. So that's also something TipTap offers us.
Right. And not just that, I think the way TipTap packages all of these extensions in they package all of these like essential extensions in something called like a starter kit. So if you are looking to create like an extension, an editor, a rich text editor, you just go to tiptap.dev and look at their tutorials. You just have to include one extension called starter kit, and it will give you starter kit, and it will give you so many things like all types of content types supported, like headings, links, paragraphs, images, and then history. And then you can disable the things that you do not want selectively inside that starter kit. So it's amazing. It's like a very developer friendly tool, and you can just like get started with it very easily.
All right. Okay. All right. So since we're talking about TipTap and the content blocks, this makes me think: how do you store underlying content? Do you store it in Markdown format? Because we also convert this whole Markdown content to HTML when we render the articles. So how do you really store the content, and how do you serialize and deserialize?
So actually, our final base storage, or like the source of truth for our storage, is always Markdown. So that comes for like a lot of reasons. Firstly, for legacy reasons, because our previous editor, we were like people were writing in Markdown, and we were just storing it on our servers in our databases. But the other reason for having that base storage as Markdown was that we also allow people to export stuff out of Hashnode. So we allow these exports in Markdown. We allow people to back up their Hashnode blogs and drafts to GitHub. And the only storage format that makes sense is Markdown. So that, because then people can take that Markdown as a source for their wherever they want to use this data, and then they can use this Markdown to create like HTML or React trees out of it or whatnot. So our base storage format is still Markdown. The the problem that we faced with TipTap was that TipTap did not accept Markdown as the initial content type. So if you have written a doc, or like if you have written a draft and you want to edit it, we cannot just take that Markdown and give it to TipTap and ask it to edit it. So TipTap accepted the articles or like the content in only two formats. One is either HTML. The second one is the prose mirror doc, which is like a prose mirror proprietary format. I won't call it proprietary; it's open source. So, but like it could accept the format at only those two formats. So what we did was that we used certain libraries for converting that Markdown that we are storing in our database, and then we convert it to HTML, and then we hand it over to TipTap, and then TipTap like locks on top of that content. And then you can, whatever editing you are doing, TipTap does that in like the proprietary on that HTML document that you have passed it. And then it can again output either HTML or the proprietary prose mirror doc. So we essentially give the HTML to TipTap. We take our Markdown, we convert it into HTML, we give it to TipTap, and then we take that HTML back from TipTap and we kind of apply the reverse process of converting that HTML into standard Markdown that we store. So these processes, like there's like specific names for these processes. So when we are taking the HTML from TipTap and processing it into Markdown, that process is called serialization. So we take that serialized Markdown and we store it in our database. And then when we are feeding that content to TipTap, we take that Markdown, we convert it into HTML and give it to TipTap. This process is called deserialization. So for serialization, we looked at a lot of libraries. So the Markdown ecosystem is very huge. And there are so many libraries that you can look at. But like people have done their research. There's lots of benchmarks also lying around that you could look at if you are making a choice for any these libraries that interconvert. So what we went ahead was that we, for the HTML to Markdown conversion, that is serialization, we use something called turn down. So it's like, again, an open source project that lets you customize the behavior quite a bit. So that was working very good for us. And for the deserialization part, the Markdown to HTML, there are so many libraries for doing that. So what we went ahead was with something called Markdown It. It was super fast. It was like beating all the other libraries and all sorts of comparisons that we did at our end and all the research that's been done online. It was the most fastest one. It did like things in 1/10 of the time as compared to the next fastest library. But it was a lot of work to configure. So because it was doing the job of converting Markdown to HTML, a lot of the types of Markdown contents were already present as like open source components or like in the library itself, baked into the library itself. But for things supporting things like our user mentions and how we want them to be represented in HTML format, we had to do quite a bit of work. But yeah, I think it was worth it.
Cool. I remember us creating those tables where we would list all these parsers. Then we will compare the performance. Then we would decide the one that we want to use, right?
Yeah, for some time when we were doing internal testing, we were doing the actual implementation of like these conversions in multiple libraries, and we are like outputting the time. We still output that time in like our like development environments where we can see how much time that conversion took. So we actually went through the process of using a lot of libraries and figuring this out for us. So Markdown it worked the best for us.
Great, right? Lakshya, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I think like how we arrived at the storage and how we arrived at the processing part of turn down and Markdown was all, as you know, already listed in those tables. And most of what we wanted to achieve is that speed is something that we didn't want to compromise with our editor, because that is something we always have as a core focus, be it our blogs and be it our editor. So we wanted that for TipTap is already fast. TipTap is very fast, but because it doesn't have that Markdown inbuilt capability, we wanted to ensure that as users are typing, they don't run into issues regarding performance for that. And I think we will probably expand more on that later. But yeah, speed has always been something we wanted to focus on, and the decision of choosing this library was mostly around that.
All right, that's great. And all right, so for our listeners, I just want to give away another fun fact, which is that when we decided to start the whole work of moving away from our old legacy editor to tiptap-based editor, we put together a small tiger team of 3 people. I think it was primarily, Rajat, Lakshya, and we also had one more engineer called Girish. But I think you took around 45 days to ship the first initial preview that we tested internally. And so far, it has been primarily Rajat and Lakshya who have been maintaining this throughout the last 1 year. Some people think we have an army of engineers who kind of work on the whole editor and who maintain it. But let me break the news that we just have 2 engineers who have been primarily 2 engineers. I mean, others contribute occasionally, small bits of code here and there, but it has been primarily Rajat and Lakshya. So tell me, yes,
I think
since you guys,
but I think like you like praised us about that, but like I think we did this in 45 days, but I think a lot of groundwork was done in moving a lot of those pages from our legacy code base to our newer code base. And
yeah,
I think that also was like done by the three of us. But I think that like laid the foundations of how we would set up this editor in the future. But yeah,
sure,
it was fun.
Yeah, I think I like to add something here. So basically, when we were building this editor, we also wanted to ensure that if there's someone new who wants to jump into this, we kind of maintain the documentation support for that. And I think Rajat started the doc for that, where we have some specific API structure and stuff that we know that this, if we are building an image extension, this is how we have built it. If we are building a embed extension, this is how we have built it. And this is how I think more and more devs, if it's something that we both can't pick up, some other dev can look at that and then maybe build some extensions. In fact, some of the extensions later on were not built by us. It was built by other devs. And also we have, as you know, we have a new dev working on something very powerful. And that's again, we'll talk about more on that later. But yeah, it's again something that's been done by that documentation that we have. And it's been pretty cool.
That's great. So that reminds me of one thing. Since you have been working on the editor for the last 1 year, talk to me about the difficulties that you have faced so far. What are some of the personal challenges that you have faced while building the whole editor?
That's a really great question. I think one of the things that we kept was that the very harder problems or the hard problems, we wanted to also kind of tackle them in the end, because we know that we have to tackle them eventually. And this comes, the one that comes to my mind at the top is that ensuring that we have a good backward compatibility with our existing Markdown and the produced HTML that we have. And the way TipTap accepts the HTML and the way we stored HTML and Markdown, we had to do our own pre-processing pipeline. So we have our own pre-processing HTML utility, which basically goes to the HTML and kind of loops over all sorts of nodes and ensures that, you know, the existing articles, if some of our users are editing an existing article, it just doesn't break suddenly. And these are kind of things I think that we did when we were rebuilding our editor. And similarly, that pipeline kind of extended well into when we are pasting content from outside. And this is something that will happen, right? Users can paste HTML from whatever site they want, and we just have to ensure that our editor works well for those. So this is one of the, I think this comes top in my mind, that one of the primary challenge that we tackled initially, and even before our, I think, internal team release, we were already working on this, and before the public beta, we had a good fleshed out pipeline to tackle this.
In fact, this is one of my favorite features, and I'm sure a lot of people appreciate that. I keep getting DMs that people just copy an HTML from somewhere else and they just paste it, and it just renders beautifully, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah, even I have heard like users, instead of like we have this import functionality where users can like bring in their drafts from other similar blogging platforms, or just like from their Markdown file. But what I've seen is like people don't use those importers. What they do is that they go to their old published blogs and they copy paste the content.
Paste it.
And that just works. Yeah.
It works beautifully.
I can also talk about more challenges here, if that's okay.
Sure.
Something that's always been there, and I think will be always there in the front end era, and which is cross-browser compatibility. So this is like always there, and I think all of us can relate, because at some point of time we have run into issues where Safari doesn't work the way we want it to, Firefox doesn't work the way it wanted to. And when we were developing editor specific features, you know, editor is such a complex state machine. I would actually call it a state machine. It has so many content types, and it sometimes have flows where you have to focus away from where you're writing, and you
Yeah.
have this new input field suddenly, and you have to ensure that it maintains the focus. And these smaller nitty gritties are like these are different across browsers, and we had to constantly ensure that we are going to Safari to check this manually, that hey, what happens if the users just focuses away from here, or what if they just open a new tab, what happens to the focus then? And it's been quite fun, but yeah, it's been also something that we have dealt with when I think when bugs were thrown at us, and we were thinking, why is this happening? And then suddenly, um, for one of our images extension, Firefox didn't work as we wanted it to. The alignment wasn't working there. So it's something that we always have been tackling, and I think we still tackle that. And but yeah, cross-browser compatibility is hard, and you can't expect all the browsers to use the same underlying engine. But yeah, let's hope that the web goes in a better direction where everything is just constant, and we just kind of focus on building features that are useful to the user.
Excellent. Yeah. But the good thing is that we're able to at least roll back real fast when
Yes.
these issues crop up.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. So
Thanks to ourselves for that. Yeah.
yes, amazing. The instant rollback feature is a lifesaver.
Yeah.
So
I
Rajat,
think,
yeah, go ahead.
I think just to add to that, I think one of the again the major problems that we have faced while developing the editors, and we still face it, is the kind of content that we can create, like that we can allow the users to add to their blog post. Because I think that is now being limited by not the editor capabilities; it's just being limited by us storing that final content in Markdown. So I think this becomes a very big challenge. So, for example, let's say we want a way to give the users a way in the editor that for any links they can add tooltips, and if any, like when they publish their post, when a user hovers over their link, they see a certain text that the user has inputted. Now TipTap supports that. We can do that. We can do it in our final rendering pipeline when that blog post is published. All of this is possible, but there is no standard way in Markdown to store these extra attributes. And if we because we have Markdown as our base storage format, there's it's very tricky for us to store these extra details without deviating from the Markdown standard. So I think that becomes a real challenge. We could deviate from the Markdown and create our own Hashnode flavored Markdown, but again, I think then people would not like that. Just for instance, just take the example of browsers as Lakshya was mentioning, because all of these use these slightly non-standard or non-unified processes of ways of processing things. I think if we have our own flavor of Markdown, it will be it won't go towards that unified future. So if people are exporting that Markdown, they won't be able to process it in a nice way or use the existing libraries to make use of that Markdown in the correct way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that all of this, there's a lot of metadata that users might want with each content type. And because Markdown wasn't originally built for that, right? Markdown is not built for highly interactive things. But we know that tech can support that highly interactive things. And this is something Rajat and me constantly also discuss, that, okay, there's no Markdown equivalent for that. So we have to take a decision on how to achieve that, or maybe just put it on hold and just revisit it in the future if that's something we really want to build. But yeah, because the tech space, underlying tech allows that, I think in future maybe we can just use it for some of our other product offerings if it makes sense.
Definitely. And I can totally understand. Every time we discuss about a new content block, the first question is, does it have a Markdown equivalent, right? Which is
exactly.
which is a big blocker, but I'm sure we'll solve that eventually.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So another fun fact is that the other day when I was browsing the Hashnode feed, I noticed a blog post with 75 minutes of reading time, right? So which is insane. Which means people can really create really large documents on Hashnode. So how do you ensure that the editor performs without any lag? What measures are in place? How were you able to reach a stage where the editor is able to effortlessly handle such large documents.
Right. So I think like TipTap as a library and like the underlying technology that we are using for most of the things, they're fairly performant out of the box. But when it comes to user generated content, there's still an element of what the user can add or how long posts a user might create, so that your DOM itself goes so big that it might start lagging. So we have specific, like we do not restrict the users on the length or like the kind of content they can add, or you can just add 3 images. We don't do that kind of stuff, but we mostly generally ensure that like because it's React at the end of the day, we mostly ensure that there are no unnecessary re-renders happening. All the uh, there is no unnecessary re-renders happening. We also ensure that there's no memory leaks, just like general standard coding practices, and it's been working pretty well for us. The other thing that we do, which sometimes like becomes a problem, is like when we are adding new libraries, we make sure that things that are being added in like the basic flow of the editor, they are not adding a lot of lag to it. So for that, we usually do a lot of manual testing. Sometimes we add like tests for that as well. Like for example, and the other thing is like the other thing that we recently faced is that we recently upgraded to the latest versions of TipTap. So TipTap released like a bigger update. We updated to that. That was perfectly fine. But the recent update that they launched, once we updated to that, we started seeing a slight amount of lag when there were like a lot of interactive components on that page. So now we've spoken to the TipTap people about it, but that functionality, the core functionality of TipTap that was causing that lag, was not very relevant for us. So essentially now we are maintaining like a patch on top of that TipTap version internally for Hashnode, where we have essentially eliminated that code path which was adding the lag. So I'll still get in touch with the good folks at TipTap and see whether that is essentially needed or not. But yeah, these are the kind of things that we usually take care of. The other, we were hearing some complaints from some users that they were seeing lag on the editor while typing. The keystrokes were appearing keystrokes were appearing in a delayed way. Most of the times, it's like an underlying extension on the user's end. So there's like a Chrome extension meddling with stuff. Those kind of things essentially cause a lot of these issues. So we just ask users to disable them. And some of the third-party integrations that we provide on our end, we have seen them also behave erratically. So what we essentially do is we always give the people a way to disable those integrations so that they can function they can work with like a slightly less advanced editor, and then they can take their articles forward and create them. And now like for stricter measures, we also ensure that a lot of these extensions are disabled by default. So that is a step that we had to take in order to ensure that our editor does not lag. But most of the time, we have not been hearing complaints from people. So you mentioned a 75 minutes article. I think like the biggest I have seen is a 112-minute read time article. It was like, I think, a full course by a user. It was like some time back. I don't remember that. But yeah, it's good to see people creating such long form content on the editor without facing any issues.
Yeah, I think we had that 100 minutes or something on accessibility. I remember some of that article because I read through it, and it was really lengthy. But yeah, I remember though it was produced by our own editor, so that's good. Yeah,
amazing. And yeah, I mean this is really really cool. And I think with the recent path package update and the idea to turn off the offending extensions by default, I think that will increase the whole performance by default, and people will have very good time creating really really large documents from now.
But just like a request to all the users, we also have like a series functionality. So probably if you're writing like 100 plus minutes articles, probably don't stress test our system. It will serve you well, but probably it's worthwhile breaking that article down into smaller consumable chunks so that people can read them and like know when a certain section is finishing.
Sure. I think that's a good advice. People can.
Yeah, that's a nice plug-in to one of our features as well. So yeah, works well.
Cool. On a related note, how do you ship with confidence? Do you have a lot of integration tests, or do you write unit tests? How do you make sure that you don't break anything and you ship with confidence?
Yeah, I think I'll take that. So when we begin with the editor again, it was done in a I would say it was done in a hackathon-driven development way, and we have been
Yes.
lately testing that again, right?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to first ensure that we have good compatibility with features, and we did start with a basic layout of test, and we do this currently in a sandbox environment where there's not everything related to article like publishing article or updating article, but more on tests which just focus on editor specific operations. That hey, what if a person is using certain markdown to insert that? Is it basically getting, is the HTML that's being produced, is that correct? Or so such set of, I think we have interactions that we have done, and I think these have helped us. Like I would say honestly, these have helped us like one or two times when there was some kind of breaking change at the markdown level or the node level. But yeah, it's been constant, I would say, struggle plus a lot of manual testing for something like editor, because as I highlighted before, editor is a complex mix of states. You have so many operations, and sometimes they can intertwine, and it's kind of hard to test for everything that comes across. And we have actually recently also, I think, when we were doing the package updates, we have faced few, I think, test related some kind of bugs which a test couldn't catch, because we yeah, on the first place, I think we didn't cover that code path, and we realized that it's better to cover that code path. And I think Rajat worked on those tests again, and we now have those scenarios covered by that. So we'll be looking towards writing more and more tests to cover those code paths and handling all those ifs and buts that the editor brings us to us. And yeah, hoping that we can build a robust testing suite just for the editor as well.
And I think
Sure.
just to add to that, like what I realized while adding like writing tests for the editor was that with Cypress, we have like we use Cypress for our end-to-end testing. And what I realized was that like when we were actually testing a lot of scenarios, when a certain thing is happening, what happens if the user clicks here? Where does their selection go? Where does their cursor go? Or like are there pop-ups on the screen that load? I realized that Cypress is like dispatching those events, and then there was like a package called Cypress Real Events. Like the package is actually named that, and we were using like we had to use that and switch to using that package to actually do those operations in reality, so that all browsers perform like when we tested on all browsers using Cypress, they get the real events rather than just like a simulation of those events. So I think it's been a great learning experience just testing this editor.
That's cool. That's cool. And another fun fact is that all of our guests so far, they have won one Hashnode internal hackathon at least, right?
Oh yeah, yes. And I think like some of the winning features are yet to be deployed, but yeah, coming very soon.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And okay, all right. So let's slightly change the topic. Okay, so with the recent advancements in AI, we were quick enough to integrate a lot of those AI related features into the editor, right? So what was the biggest challenge integrating such AI features into the Hashnode editor? Did you face any particular challenge? And if yes, how did you solve them? Can you list out some of those interesting bits?
Yeah, so I think like AI was like definitely a no-brainer for us. With the advancements in generative AI, especially like text-based content, an year back when we like started on the AI features, probably it was like an year, probably not an year, probably like 10 months or so. But right after we launched the
It feels like an year. It feels like an year, but it's never an year. It's
feels
just
like
like
10.
5 months back. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think when we started working on the AI features, I think the biggest challenge, which was like not a technical challenge, was like getting those limits done sorted from OpenAI so that we can like actually roll out this feature to a set of users. And we like then we ran the public beta with like I think 450 users, a private beta. But yeah, I think getting good results was always a challenge. There were like because essentially what our editor features provided was giving the users a way to rewrite their content in a certain way or generate more ideas around certain types of content. And with that text, like the prompt engineering was also a relatively new thing. Not a lot of people were talking about it. So essentially, the content that the users had written in their document was adding to the prompt quite a bit. I think getting good results it's still a challenge, but it's like a fairly solved thing now. People are getting good results with it. Then certain things that we wanted to add AI capabilities to, like our SEO tags or like SEO description or SEO metadata. So all of those things, we had like a knowledge base of ensuring and like delivering highly performant SEO performant blogs on Hashnode. So all of that knowledge gave us a lot of insights into how a certain thing should be done. And there were like guidelines around certain things. So I remember there was like some field, I don't remember at the top of my head, but probably it was meta description or something. So we had like notes in our code that this was restricted at 157 characters,
Yeah.
on an n number of characters. And I wasn't sure like why that was, but then like reading more about it, and then there were links. So I read more about them, and then it had to be kept under that length. And getting results from AI under certain characters or under certain words was always a challenge. I believe it's still a challenge, and we were like able to solve it by like querying the AI multiple times, and if it's long, asking it to make it short, and just going inside that recursive loop without losing a lot of context. But yeah, that's what we did to solve that. Image alt generation is also still a challenge because of the type of like, because with user generated content where you have like very little context on what the user can upload, there are not a lot of models that can actually look at that content and generate really good alt text for those images. Probably we should try GPT Vision now that it's out. But the models that we relied on at that time, like around 8 months back, which is like an eternity back in the AI world. So I think those were not advanced enough to generate really good captions, because a lot of times what people are doing, they're just sharing screenshots of code. A lot of times people are just sharing screenshot of an architectural diagram. So I think just generating alt text for those images is slightly problematic. One thing that we are still currently working on fixing, I don't remember whether we have shipped that or not, is the Markdown preservation.
Yeah.
Have we shipped that?
That's going live tonight, most likely.
Oh, nice. Most likely from tonight or from tomorrow, you will be able to preserve formatting in the content that you have written. So I think what happens is, like, if you have written a certain text and you have made a certain text bold inside it, what happens is then when you get the response back from OpenAI, it does not respect that bold formatting and it just remove that, or it sometimes just remove that whole word completely. So I think that is going to get fixed very soon. And then I think then it was just like more ethical issues of not like just giving this AI as an assistance feature and not a content generation feature. Hashnode never wants to be a place where people come and just dump their AI generated content. Readers are coming to Hashnode to read content from their, like the people who they look up to, or like the developers that they follow. So we always want that originality of content, and I don't think AI is close enough to getting people that. So just we just like putting those safeguards in there and having those safeguards in place so that people use this as an assistive feature and not a generation feature. And apart from that, I think it's just like just avoiding the urge of putting AI everywhere in all of the sections of the app was also something that we had to tackle, because we are getting a lot of ideas. Okay, let's put AI here, or let's use AI here. So I think that just resisting all those urges was a challenge, I'd say.
That is like the third most difficult thing in engineering, resisting the urge to put AI everywhere.
Yeah, I think we touched upon caching and naming on the last podcast episode. But yeah, that's the third one, definitely.
All right, fair enough. So, okay. So moving on to the next topic, can each of you give me one exciting feature that you shipped to the editor recently? Let's start with Lakshya.
Yeah. So I think we have been working with our designers over the past year to get a consistent Hashnode design throughout. And we started with when you just go to hashnode.com, the way you see your home feeds, it's different. If you were using Hashnode 1 year back, it was entirely different from what it looks right now. And that is something, I think it's kudos to the effort put in by our designers. And since we have shipped that, we realized that our editor could use a revamped design. And along with the design, it can also use some accessibility updates. And so we shipped something we called internally Editor V2. And it's been again an internal hackathon thing. Yeah, most of our stuff is coming from there only. Surprisingly.
We're removing the regular roadmap and just do a hackathon development.
So that is something Joshua, who is one of our designer, who worked on the whole editor V2 design, and me worked on. And basically now we have a revamped left sidebar and the right sidebar where you see most of the publishing options or updating options. And what's changed is that we have now grouped things into specific sections so that the if you have to create a new draft, you can do it successfully. You can just focus on that area. And I think this is one of the favorites thing, and something Rajat also mentioned quite a bit when we shipped it, that he can now effectively go back to Hashnode instead of
Yes.
instead of mistakenly trying to close the sidebar. He used to click on left chevron icon that we had in the old editor, and now that's gone. That is something we wanted to do, and we had just shifted that button on the bottom of the left sidebar. It's called back to Hashnode. It makes sense from user experience perspective, and it's there now. Similarly, at the right sidebar, again, we wanted to group things into sections, so that it makes sense that okay, these are some of the toggleable things. And when I talk about toggleable, so we removed our checkboxes with switches, which kind of look pretty and make sense from the user point of view also. And again, we wanted to ensure that we have consistent tooltips across the editor. And with our own component design system that we have been iterating over, we brought some of those nice goodies here as well, along with I think again proper ARIA labels for all those tooltips, as well as proper labels for the form fields that we have at the right sidebar. So it's been good. It's been a design update with more focus on better accessibility, and I hope our users will enjoy it.
Nice. Easily one of my favorite updates lately. Cool.
Yeah.
Rajat, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think for me, the recent feature that I remember, like the recent big update that I remember was drag and drop. So I think I've been wanting to do that for a very long time. Users were requesting for it. And again, it's one of those no-brainer features that you need in text editors. Like with such a nice amount of great products already out there, like Notion and stuff, they made us lazy. We don't want to copy paste content. Everything is just dragging and dropping and rearranging. And you wanted that in our editor. So I think that was good. That was a good experience. Like building that was not very tricky again because of the underlying tech. TipTap does not have like a very good drag and drop support, but the underlying prose mirror, you can hook into it and build a drag and drop based a drag and drop approach for dragging content here and there. And this was again highly inspired by some of the code that is already written in other great projects. So when I was looking for like the best way to implement this, we tried a few things ourselves, but then when I looked into more of how people were doing it, we found how the good folks like novel.sh are doing it. And on that editor, we found like a way that worked pretty well for us, or like an approach that worked pretty well for us. We took inspiration from them and we added like our own tidbits on top of it to make it compatible with the way we are doing it. And yeah, I think again, so got a lot of praise from users for that. We internally are loving it quite a bit as well. It's so much easier to rearrange content. So yeah, that was good.
It personally makes my life so easy. I don't have to remove things and move them around. I can just simply drag and drop and rearrange. So thanks for building that, like Rajat. Okay. All right. Cool. So so we have been building a lot of exciting things, and I also know that there are a couple of really interesting things cooking up, right? So what are some of those things? What are some of those exciting things that we're sipping next?
Nice. I can take that up. So I think one thing that I think the next step for us to support teams or like huge teams to create content in a more collaborative way is collaborative editing. So we want people to come and work on a doc together, and we want people to come and collaborate on things. We want people to get credit for things that they've written, and we are like shipped things recently because like for now what people are doing that they open their draft, they do things, and then there's like multiple people contributing to an article and they weren't getting credits. So I think the first step we took for that was that we added the ability to add co-authors to your published post. So now post is not attached to just one author. So if multiple people have collaborated on a doc, you can add them as co-authors if they are in your team blog. But what we want now is like full-fledged collaborative editing. We want people to come onto the doc and get the ability to edit that at the same time, like it's possible with like some other tools like Google Docs. You've seen multiple cursors. So the underlying tech also supports it. TipTap has a collaboration extension that we're relying on, and there are a lot of services that we are looking into to get to this collaborative editing. But I'm really excited about it. We are in a stage where we can internally start testing this probably from tomorrow. But yeah, more of that later. So I'll give that update to you, Sandeep. But
Amazing.
yeah, I think that.
But this is not easy, right? This is really, really tough.
This is really tough. This is really tough. And yeah, I think like the thing is like the technology and the platforms and services, the way they have provided a very nice way out to build if you want to build something from scratch, or like if you want to build a very basic just that thing kind of thing, or just like in collaborative editor. But if you are doing that in a very big product, there's like lots of nuances to it. It's not just that you integrate something and you use TipTap and it just works out of the box. So I think they're just like ironing out those quirks. It's fairly like technology makes it possible, but just making it work well in the system that you have in a way that users like it is the problematic part here. So we are just like tackling that. So yeah, soon we'll have collaborative editing on docs and posts and whatnot, drafts and posts and whatnot. And then we again in the spirit of again allowing more collaboration, we are also next up we'll be starting working on inline commenting, where people can like on a non-published post. We already allow this to allow users to do this for like post reviews and stuff, where people from their team can come and comment on the totality of a draft. But what we want is like inline comments, where while making edits, you can just choose any piece of content and then you can make a comment on it. So if you are reviewing someone's unpublished post and stuff, we want to give you the ability to add those inline comments so that you can provide more feedback or fix things or just suggest things to the actual author. Yeah, these two things. And apart from that, like lots of other small improvements that we constantly keep on shipping. But yeah, these are the two big things that we are working on and planning to work on.
Exciting. That's very exciting. And just for our listeners, these two features, or rather, these two feature requests were driven by our Headless Hashnode users. So Headless Hashnode is our new feature that lets teams and individuals roll out their custom frontends using Hashnode's public APIs. And we also give starter kits so that they can get started really, really quickly without starting from scratch. And if companies, so with this, we are seeing quite a few companies using Hashnode. And one thing that they miss is the ability to collaborate like they do on Google Docs, and the ability to highlight a piece of text and attach their comments. So, which is why we set out to build these two features in the spirit of helping companies collaborate better. And like Rajat says, these will land really, really soon. We're in the final stages of testing this internally. But I'm personally super excited about these two exciting features.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have realized with the launch of Headless Hashnode is that we have essentially given the users a way to host their own custom front end. So that makes like we had like super optimized blog hosting for people as well, and we still have that for all the people. But I think with a lot of companies choosing to customize, or like with a lot of users just choosing to customize their own blogs to their own content, I think the part of Hashnode that still stays with Hashnode is the editor, and that becomes more and more core. So I think we'll keep on continuously improving the editor and adding all those functionalities to the editor that makes the editor more fun to collaborate.
Exactly. They bring their own front end, but the whole content creation and management happens on Hashnode, which means we have to constantly keep improving it and upgrading it. And by the way, if you have not tried out Headless, you can head to hashnode.com/headless to learn more about the Headless feature. And we also have our starter kits, which is basically a Next.js and Tailwind powered open source project. And it has multiple themes, and which means you can run a blog that looks exactly like any other Hashnode blog on your custom domain subpath. And you are also free to change anything you want to change, and there is no limitations to the customizations.
And the amazing thing is, like, now the community is also contributing more to creating more such templates. So I think now we have like an Astro powered starter kit as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we'll have more really, really soon so that we have the options for everyone, not just the ones who are comfortable with Next.js.
And I think every day we are getting some or the other submission from Twitter or somewhere that someone has customized maybe our enterprise version of the starter
Yeah,
kit or the personal theme. And it's
exactly.
just good to see that users are just putting their own flavor of like branding or kind of using it as a portfolio. And I think that's one of the great points of going headless, that you can actually build your customized portfolio with us handling all the the nitty-gritties of that content and getting it to you in the right shape.
Uh, yeah, a lot of our users are also like Hashnode being like an engineering blogging platform. A lot of our users are fairly tech savvy. So if you want to contribute and like create a starter kit and like a technology that you like, we'll be happy to help you as well. We have very, very powerful GraphQL based APIs that help you host like your blogs front end very easily. So if you want to do it in any technology, you can like reach out to one of us.
Absolutely. And if you're keen on contributing, feel free to head over to github/hashnode/starterkit and send a pull request. Okay, so this has been really interesting and productive podcast episode. So let's end it with one last question, which is, what have been your personal big learning from this particular project over the last 1 year? What have you learned?
I think in short, like front end is tough. Editors are tougher. But yeah, I think
Absolutely.
like in terms of learning, I think just using technology to build a product and building a product that is like fairly intuitive to use, and like the user aspect of it, or like keeping the user at the forefront of your product development is very, very important. And I think that's been a great learning for me. So I think just understanding user intent, figuring out where the trend is going, or how people are creating content right now. So I think all of those led us to make those decisions, like pressing the slash key should give them a menu right away. Pressing at the rate should give them a list of users to mention. Or pressing a certain shortcut, what that should do. So I remember like we got a request for like adding a shortcut for links from like Michael Novotny, like the director of engineering from Versal. So they asked for that. And like it felt okay, yeah, this is something we should have done from the get-go. So I think now we are being more and more conscious of like understanding how users are going to use it and then applying engineering on top of it. So yeah, I think that's been a great learning. And I think with the product where users interact and like create content, like where you want to give them enough flexibility and also want to have enough guardrails so that things don't go haywire, I think it becomes very, very important to keep those things in mind.
Sure, that makes sense.
Those are like really great points, especially the user intent, which is like, again, we get the user feedback and we think upon, okay, we could have approached this way. This does sound better, and then we just work on it if it sounds good. And I think for me personally, if I talk about from the technical perspective, when we approached the editor, I think we first laid out the initial setup with having the articles in mind, right? That is something we always wanted to do first, because that's has been our main creation pipeline. That's how our users have been able to create content. And I think it led to a good amount of extensions, but some of the extensions were still are tied to very specific article creation pipelines, and that has sometimes prevented us from reusing the same code at other places. We know our editor is powerful and we want to extend on top of it, but I think this has led to us in rethinking on how to better abstract this stuff. And I think we will solve these things soon with better abstractions. That is where we want to head as well, because of how headless is going on. I think this is something we can benefit from, and it would be a really cool problem to solve. And I think the second one I would say is again cross-browser compatibility. I usually like to quote that. That's my favorite thing to quote, coming from a front-end background. Yeah. So one of the things is that it's
nicest
good
code
to
for learning, problems,
yeah,
and excuses. It's not working out for
excuses,
that.
everything.
That's why
It always works well. So it's better to research the API compatibility beforehand, like before you go to implement some CSS stuff or some JS stuff. And there are sites like Can I Use, and it's like something I've been really putting in efforts to just go through and see, hey, is this even supported in Safari? Is this even in Firefox? And sometimes even if things are supported, their internal behaviors can be different. Because, and that is something, for example, just fun fact that Safari handles viewports differently than Firefox and Chrome. It has this thing called, like each browser has this thing called visual viewport and logical viewport, layout viewport. And Safari handles the measurements of stuff like window, dot, inner height differently. So all of these kind of, and when you're building on these APIs, right, you don't realize the scale until you have hit that mark. Okay, what if the user just zoomed in Safari? What will happen then? Right? This is something that's always there. And I think looking at these APIs and their compatibility in the first place is the way to go before taking any action there.
And now there's Arc as well.
Yeah. Oh,
now
yeah.
There's the Arc browser as well. There's this funny story, right?
But the good thing is, I think Arc is still based on Chromium. So we don't have to think about from the API consistency there. And Chromium has been always like good to work on, because I think the team is picking up all the features, and I would say that they have been constantly updating to the new standards, and other browsers are following them. Not Safari, I think, but yeah, it's always been there that there's some or the other thing working with WebKit or something not working with Chromium. But yeah, that's on the browsers thing. And I would say the third thing is that it's better to refactor, revisit old code. And I think recently Rajat also stripped down some of the code from our editor that we know that was not actually being used, because again, as you grow, there's a lot of code that you introduce, and there might be cases where the old code is actually it never gets triggered. So when it's there and you're working on something new, then you kind of end up in that decision paralysis that, hey, do I want to remove that or do I want to still keep that? And I think this is something before going towards that collaboration direction, Rajat worked on just removing those old bits of code. And I think the last one, this is like something that I've learned from designers, especially, is how do we educate our users about the new features and that we have landed up in the editor, right? What's the best way? Do we show them a modal of, hey, we have landed this? Do we show them certain popovers? What's the best flow there? And I think this is something our designers have been actively working on. And soon I think we can have a flow where we can just let the users know about the features by using just a product instead of seeing a changelog on Twitter, or instead of heading towards changelog. I think something we would want to make a part of a core experience. So, yeah.
Excellent, amazing. And I must say that we should also create a prize for the viewers if they can count exactly how many times Lakshya has said cross-browser compatibility.
Yeah, surely that's actually a nice idea. I'll probably create a fake account, and I'll probably do that now.
All right. This has been really great, and this has been very, very productive, and I'm sure our listeners have gained new knowledge by watching this podcast episode. And lastly, I would like to thank you guys for joining the second episode. It has been really, really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks. You've been an amazing host, and it was really fun to have this podcast.
Thank you.